You will live at Thornfell, the Duke of Aldermere told the woman who had been his wife for 4 hours, and I will live in London, and we shall both of us be spared the trouble of pretending this was anything but a transaction. He did not look up from his papers as he said it. The carriage is waiting. I have had your things sent ahead. Lydia Marsh, Lydia, Duchess of Aldermere now, though the title sat on her like a borrowed cloak, stood very straight in the cold hall and said only, "I understand, your grace." That was all. No tears, no plea, no clutching at his sleeve. Alaric had braced for one of those and found, when it did not come, that he was faintly, unaccountably annoyed. He had married her for the plainest of reasons. Her father held the mortgages on 3 of the farms that bordered Aldermere's southern boundary, and her father had wanted a duke for a daughter who had no fortune of her own, and Alaric had wanted those farms and an end to the man's bleating, and so a dowerless girl with steady grey eyes had been the price of it. He had met her twice before the wedding. She had not simpered. He had given her credit for that and nothing more, for he had long since stopped expecting anything of marriage, but inconvenience, having watched his own mother and father pass 30 years under one roof in a silence so complete that the servants spoke in whispers. So he sent her north, to the worst of his holdings, a half-ruined castle on a moor where no Aldermere had lived in 40 years, and he went back to London and his clubs and his cold-ordered bachelor's life, and he did not think of her at all. That, at least, was what he told himself through the autumn. It was a curious thing, then, how often the steward's letters seemed to mention her. Her Grace has had the East Range chimneys swept and 3 rooms made habitable, the man wrote in October. Her Grace has engaged 2 girls from the village and is teaching them to dress fowl and air linen. Alaric read it without interest and set it aside. Her Grace has had the orchard wall rebuilt and means to have it bearing again, came in November. The village holds her in high regard. She has sat up 2 nights with the smith's wife in her lying-in. He frowned at that one, though he could not have said why, and put it on the fire. By December the letters had taken on a tone he liked even less, because he could not name it. Her Grace keeps a good table now, though she dines alone. Her Grace has had your late grandmother's portrait restored and hung again in the great hall, and has the hall lit of an evening, and the village children come to sing at the gate, and she gives them apples and lets them warm by the fire. There was no reproach in any line of it. The steward was a dry old man who reported facts. And yet each letter was, Alaric came slowly to feel a small accusation he could not answer, that a woman he had thrown away into a ruin was making of that ruin a home, and asking him for nothing, and managing, this was the intolerable part, entirely well without him. He told himself he was glad. A wife who made no demands was the whole of what he had wanted. He found he had begun, on the nights he could not sleep, to imagine the hall lit, and the children at the gate, and her at the head of a table he had never sat at, dining alone in a house he had condemned her to. He found the image would not leave him. It was in January that the other letter came, not from the steward, but in a fair, even hand he did not know, which could only be hers, the first she had ever sent him. Your Grace, it read, I write only to keep you informed of your property as is proper. Thornfell is in good order and wants for nothing. The accounts are enclosed and you will find them honest. I make no claim on your time or your purse beyond the household sum we agreed, and I shall continue to manage within it. You need not trouble yourself to reply. I remain your obedient servant. And there she had signed not Lydia, but Lydia, Duchess of Aldermere, the full cold title he himself had given her in that hall, handed back to him now as flat and final as he had handed it over. He read it 3 times. There was not one word of complaint in it. There was not one word of warmth either. It was the letter of a woman who had taken his measure exactly, accepted it without bitterness, and built herself a life in the gap, where a husband should have stood, a life, he understood with a slow cold drop in his chest, that no longer had any room in it shaped like him. She was not waiting. She had stopped waiting. She had everything she required, and she required nothing of him, and if he never came north in his life, she would go on giving apples to the children at the gate and dining quietly at the head of his grandmother's table, content, complete, and gone from him as surely as if she had walked away across the moor and never looked back. Alaric, Duke of Aldermere, who had wanted precisely this, sat alone in his cold London study and discovered that he could not bear it. He ordered the carriage that night. It took him 4 days north through January roads, and he made the worst of them, changing horses where he should have rested, arriving at last on the 5th evening with the moor blue-black around him and a hard sky full of stars, and there, where he remembered a black hulk of broken stone, was Thornfell with light in its windows. Warm light. Half the windows of the East Range glowed gold, and smoke went up straight from chimneys he had thought too ruined to draw, and as the carriage came up the long approach he could hear, of all things, the thin sweet sound of children singing at the gate, and could see them, a little knot of village young ones bundled to the eyes, and a tall slender figure among them in a dark blue gown handing something into their reaching mittens. The carriage stopped. He did not wait for the step. He came down into the cold and the singing and the gold light, and Lydia turned, with an apple still in her hand, and saw her husband standing in the courtyard of the castle he had banished her to, and went absolutely still. The children scattered like sparrows. The night was suddenly very quiet. "Your Grace," she said. Her voice was steady. It was always steady. He had built a whole picture of her out of how steady it always was, and only now did he hear, underneath it, how much it cost her to keep it so. "We did not look for you. There has been you sent no word." "No," Alaric said, "I did not." He could not stop looking at her. The hard north air had put colour in her face. She stood straight as she had stood in the cold hall 4 hours after their wedding, and she did not come to him, and she did not curtsy lower than the bare due of his rank, and she waited, with the perfect composure of a woman who had learned to expect nothing, to hear why he had come. "I read your letter," he said. "I see." A small line came between her brows. "I hope it gave no offence. I wished only to be correct." It was perfectly correct. The words came out of him strangely. "It was the most correct letter I have ever received. There was not one thing in it I could fault. You signed it with the title I gave you." He heard his own voice roughen and did not try to stop it. "You signed it as though I had never given you anything else, and I had not. I see that now. I gave you a cold title and an empty castle and a husband who could not be troubled to learn the colour of your eyes, and you have taken those 3 poor things and made this." He gestured, helpless, at the gold windows, the smoke, the scattered prints of children's feet in the frost. "You have made a home out of what I gave you to punish you with, and you did it without me, and you would have gone on doing it without me all your life, and never once asked me to come." "I would not presume to ask," she said quietly. "You made your wishes very plain." "I was a fool." She said nothing to that. She was too honest to disagree and too kind to twist it. "Will you let me come in?" Alaric said, and he who had never in his life asked any creature for entry to a house he owned, found he was asking, out of the cold, to the fire, to the hall you lit. "I have come a long way, Lydia, and I find I do not want to stand out here in the dark while there is warmth in there, and you in it." For a long moment she only looked at him, weighing him with those steady grey eyes, and he stood and let himself be weighed, and was not certain, truly, for the first time in his ordered life, not certain what the verdict would be. Then she stepped aside from the doorway. "Come in, then," she said. "You'll catch your death out here. You always did do things the hard way." He stopped on the threshold. It was a small thing she had said, almost nothing, the kind of thing a wife says to a husband she knows, and she did not know him. He had seen to that, and yet she had said it anyway, as though some part of her had been keeping a place for him all this while, in spite of everything. It went through him like the warmth from the fire he could not yet feel. The great hall, when he came into it, stopped him a second time. He barely knew the room. Where he remembered cold stone and rot, there was a long fire roaring in a swept hearth, and his grandmother's portrait restored and glowing above it, and a great table bare in his memory of everything, set now with a cloth and pewter, and a jar of dark winter greenery, and the bright red berries of the holly fresh cut, on a table that had not held a flower in 40 years. The light of the fire and a dozen candles moved on it all. It was simply a home, the first true home Aldermere had owned in his lifetime, and a woman he had thrown away had made it, alone, in the dark, asking him for nothing. Alaric, Duke of Aldermere, stood arrested in the doorway of his own warm hall, and was undone. "You did all this," he said. There was no one else to do it. She moved past him to the fire, and the gold light caught the plain gold band on her hand, the ring he had put there in a cold church and forgotten, and he saw that she had worn it, all this while alone with no one to see. "Sit down, your grace. I'll have something hot brought. You needn't say anything else tonight. I expect you'll want to be away again in the morning." "No," he said. She paused. "I am not going away in the morning." He crossed the hall to her, slowly, as a man crosses ground he is not sure will bear him, and he stopped before her at the fire, and he said the thing he had ridden 4 hard days to say, and had only understood the whole of in the last 5 minutes. "I do not want to be spared the trouble of you, Lydia. I have been spared it all autumn, and has been the loneliest season of my life. You built a home, and I sat in an empty house in London and called it freedom, and it was nothing of the kind. I came north because I read a letter in which you let me go, and I found I would rather do anything in the world than be let go by you." He drew a breath. "I gave you a cold title. I am asking you to let me try, however late, to be worth the warm part of it. Let me stay. Not for the farms. Not for your father. Let me stay and learn the colour of your eyes, and dine at this table you laid, and stand at that gate and give the children their apples beside you. Let me come home. You have already made it one. I only ask leave to live in it." She had gone very still again, but it was a different stillness now, and when she lifted her face to his he saw at last what the steadiness had been holding back all this time, brimming now and bright in the firelight. "They are grey," she said, her voice not steady at all any more. "What?" "My eyes. You said you never learned the colour of them." A tear went down, and she laughed, the smallest broken laugh. "They are grey, your grace. You might have asked. I have been here the whole time." "Alaric," he said low. "My name is Alaric. I should like very much to hear you use it." "Alaric." She tried it like something she had not been permitted before. "You stubborn, foolish man. 4 days on the winter roads. You'll be ill for a week, and I shall have to nurse you, and serve you right." "Then nurse me," said the Duke of Aldermere, and he took her cold hand with its plain gold ring and held it to his chest, where she could feel that his heart, the cold ordered thing he had thought all use, was hammering for her alone. "And scold me, and lay this table for 2, and let me stay. I have come a very long way to find that the only home I own is the one you made out of the ruin I gave you, Lydia. Let me come in from the cold for good." And she, who had made a home where there was none, and kept husband's ring where there was no husband, and asked him for nothing, and would have gone on asking him for nothing forever, closed her steady, brimming grey eyes, and leaned into him at last, and let the long cold season end. He stayed. He did not go back to London that spring, nor the next, except to bring her with him on his arm, and let the fine world stare. Thornfell, the ruin no Aldermere would live in, became the house they loved best of all the houses they owned, for the simple reason that it was the one she had made warm. The orchard bore again. The children sang at the gate every Christmas, and there were, in time, small hands among them that were her own, and a coat far too large hung by the door that the smallest of them would one day grow into. And on winter nights, when the fire was high and the holly was fresh on the table, she had laid for them both, Alaric, Duke of Aldermere, would look at his wife across the warm hall and remember the man who had told her once that they would be spared the trouble of each other, and he would reach for her hand and the plain gold ring upon it, and thank God under his breath that she had been kind enough and brave enough and home enough to let that cold man come in